This week we've got 48 Chevy work to share with you as usual, along with the Chevy truck. We have a diesel project that came in that the students will be working on. And last Sunday, an 8,600-pound vehicle was flatbedded in here, and by Thursday we were driving it around. That's included in this episode as well. Thanks for tuning in.
We used pieces of inner tube to make cushions for the coil springs. I'm making the rear and drive shaft tube smooth like the bottom of the frame.
Next, we set to work on the master cylinder. We start by removing the brake and clutch levers. Now we can pull it apart. You see that it hasn't worked in a long time. The brake fluid looks like mud. With everything cleaned, we are installing our master cylinder rebuild kit.
The calipers on this truck don't seem to have been moving as freely as they should, so we're pulling them apart to clean them, machine the rotors, and install new pads. We're cleaning the inner and outer mounting surface of the rotor to index them on the machine straight. After a few fast cuts, it's ready for a final slow cut. The blades are set for a 2/1000th cut. Next, we sand them for a non-directional finish that will help the new pads seat better.
I'm putting thread locker on the caliper bracket bolt.
While the Auto Ones were doing an oil change and maintenance check, they noticed a leaking rear pinion seal that we'll replace. They also spotted a transmission line leaking, and the lower core support is rotted as well. That will be replaced along with the lines.
We're doing some final buttoning up of the engine.
Did he say to leave one in each side?
Yeah, just leave one. Alright.
So we're gonna leave this one?
Yeah. Yes.
The fuel tanks are also being removed to replace the sending units and hoses.
This forklift has been sitting for over 8 years. We started by draining the fuel tank to flush it. Along with the new battery, we're replacing the cable ends. The field wire for the alternator was corroded, so we put a new section of wire and soldered a new end on. Heat shrink will make it less likely to corrode. With the new terminal clean, we replaced the wire. We're flushing the entire fuel system, so replacing the filter is a must. Next, we remove the breather to get to the carburetor. Cleaner is blown through the hard line.
This is a Mikuni Solex carburetor. I'll begin by pulling off the top. Now the accelerator pump comes off. The diaphragm still looks good. This looks to be a metering block. I turned the mixture screw in to count the turns before it seats. It turned into 2 1/4 turns. I'll set it back to that during assembly. Now the float and float needle are removed. we got our main jet in there, as you can see. Now we're going to put our mixture screw. Got it cleaned up really well. So we're going to put it back where it belongs. So I'm putting in the mixture screw now. This is going to be our main adjustment. And before I took it apart, I turned it in to see, until it stopped to see how many turns out it was. So it was 2 1/4 turns out. And that's where we're going to start with this because it clearly was running there before. So that'll be our initial adjustment. So I'm turning it all the way in to seat the needle. Now I'm going to back it out the 2 1/4 turns. There's a half, there's 1, there's a half, there's 2, and there's my 1/4. Alright, so we're about ready to put the top of the carburetor on now. We've got our fuel inlet here. This is where the fuel line comes in and feeds the fuel into the carburetor itself through there. So we have a needle that controls that, how much fuel enters and goes into the carburetor itself. So that's our needle here. And if you notice what this thing does, it seats off against the seat for the fuel, so it shuts it off. But also here, this is a piece that a lot of people forget about or don't pay any attention to. That right there should bump in and out or move up and down and make sure that it is free. It was stuck a little, I cleaned it up. So what that does is that when the vehicle is being driven, when it's bumping around and moving around, this will keep the seat, the needle rather, from coming off the seat all the time and causing the carburetor to flood. So that little bit of cushion there, that movement, keeps the needle seated until it's needed to move off the seat to allow more fuel in. So I guess I'll go ahead and put that in there. I've got everything nice and clean. And we'll get our float set up with our pin. So we'll get this over top of that like so. So as we said, the fuel's going to enter here. And then it's going to drain down through there to the top of the carburetor. And then this float right here, what it does is it allows, hopefully you can see it, when the fuel level comes up, it's going to work like a bobber for fishing. Fuel level is going to come up, and then it's going to seat that needle against the seat, and then that will shut the fuel off. And then as the vehicle is being driven and it uses more gas, this drops, comes up again. So it's a constant monitoring to keep enough fuel in the carburetor so the vehicle can run. So there's an adjustment for this as well. We don't have the adjustment, but what we are going to do, if you don't have the actual adjustments to measure it to within 64ths of inches, when you have this thing turned completely upside down, which I don't right now, but what you can do is if you can get the arm of the float parallel to the housing, that's generally a good place to set it. Otherwise, there is a way to measure that, and again, we don't have it. So, and that's already pretty good where it is. So that's the way it was, and again, the vehicle was running that way, and we shouldn't have any trouble either. All right, so now we're going to set our gasket up, and we were able to use everything. Gaskets, everything came apart nice and clean. This is a carburetor, by the way, from an early 80s Mitsubishi truck, we assume. And it would have taken over a week to get the kit in for this thing. So either way, I had to pull it apart no matter what. So I was just hopeful that everything came apart and I could reuse it, and we did. So we're just going to put this back together using all the same components and pieces. Float goes in. Everything is set up there. I'm real happy with how that gasket looked when it came apart. So now I'm going to get a good seal with it again. Double check that, and there we go. Yeah, that pretty much does it. So kids are going to put this back on this morning when they come in, and we'll see if we can get this thing fired up today. You may have seen the students do this before. I'm doing this right now myself just to get it knocked out. The kids aren't here yet. It's early in the morning. I'm trying to get this done so we can get this forklift fired off today. So we're making a gasket for where it goes, where the carburetor bolts to this mid plate. So I'm going to make the outside perimeter here of it. I'm keeping it nice and tight and hammering on it so get the edges. Alright, so now what I can do is pull this, break this away. Oops. And what that's going to leave us with, hopefully, is the perimeter, or at least the shape of the gasket. There we go. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is put this back, and you can see it fits pretty well. Now I'm going to knock the holes in here. And I'm going to do that with this end of the hammer. That's what that actually is for. That's for gasket making. Like that. And once I punch all these out, there you go. We have a gasket. So we'll set that on like so. And there we are. That's going to work perfect. Alright, do it again.
The battery terminal on the rollback is cracked. The entire cable is being replaced. The rollback diesel engine is having a fuel drain back issue. That usually means there's air getting in somewhere. We'll check the fuel system out from the fuel delivery at the lift pump to the injection pump and the fuel return. Removing the vacuum pump allows better access to the hard line. This hose is showing signs of dry rot, so we're replacing it.
Next time on Bulldog Builds, we'll have the master cylinder back together and installed on the frame. We'll also have the drive line and rear end painted for the 48. And we'll have the core support put in the Dodge Dakota. Next week will be a short week for us as we're going down south to compete in a competition and visit some businesses. We'll be sharing that with you next week. See you next time.